Hey guys, Chris Peach here, and welcome to the Money Peach podcast. Hey, do you remember growing up learning how to handle money? Yeah, neither do I. So that's why we're here today, to make your money fun again. You know, we're going to talk about the principles in life that actually matter when it comes to managing your money in a way that works. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Money Peach podcast. Before we jump into another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast, I want to take a second to talk to you guys about my free budgeting form. You know, the first step to getting on any financial plan is to measure the money. And the only way to measure the money is if you are living on a monthly budget. So after this episode, head on over to moneypeach.com and please download my free budgeting form. There's thousands of people now all over the world who are taking back control of their money using this same form each and every month. The number one habit of highly successful people is they're proactive. So be proactive with your money and get yourself on a budget. Welcome back, everyone, to another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. I'm Chris Peach. This is episode 63. Now, I'm real excited for my friend Clayton Morris to come on the show today. Clayton's actually the former co-anchor of the Fox News Network's Fox and Friends, he was on the weekend show there. And actually, just 24 hours before we recorded this episode, Clayton told the entire world that would be his last day. He was leaving television for good to pursue his true passion, which is helping people like you and I get started and get involved in real estate investing for long-term passive wealth building. Now, I wanted to bring Clayton on the show to talk about what he's doing, how he's currently building wealth through real estate, what he uses as what he calls turnkey real estate investments, what part of the country he's buying in, why he's buying there, and what to look for. Now, one of the things Clayton brings up is his freedom number and how you can get your freedom number, which basically we're going to show you what does it take to reach financial freedom and how long does that take. So without further ado, let me bring on my good friend from Fox and Friends on the Fox News Network and now real estate investor who's helping people all over the world obtain their dreams of real estate investing, Clayton Morris. Alrighty, Clayton, thank you so much for coming on the show. Super excited to have you on. We've been kind of going back and forth over the last couple months trying to get you on the show, and today is the day. So thank you for being here.
The stars aligned. It's a full moon outside. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm excited, Chris.
I'm very excited. So for those of you who are listening, you probably recognize his voice. You've probably seen him on television before, heard his voice. Maybe you've heard his podcast before. Give us a little background of who you are, what happened actually yesterday that's been kind of a big milestone in your life. Kind of give us that background there.
I've spent my whole life in broadcast television. I grew up going downstairs. My parents thought I was asleep, and I would watch Letterman and I'd watch Carson. I wanted to be David Letterman. That was my dream, growing up, to work in television and sort of break down that fourth wall of TV. And so after college, I moved to Los Angeles, got a job as a producer at Good Day Los Angeles for the Fox affiliate there as a producer, and then all over the country. Lived in Montana as a political reporter, and NBC as an anchor in West Virginia and Ohio and Florida, and you name it. I've lived all over the country. All along the way, I saw that I was constantly renting from other people, and people that I would never meet sort of face to face. And it didn't quite sink in, I guess, until a few years later that that's how you truly build passive income. That's how you truly build legacy wealth for your family. So at the time, I was just popping around from town to town and working in the news business, and eventually wound up in New York City working for the network and working for Fox News Channel. So it was 18 years and about 10 years working for Fox News Channel. I worked on a show called Fox and Friends, the morning show, and got to have fun and just things change over the years where you start to feel like that dinner guest, like everyone leaves, but the one guy who's like hanging out, and you're putting the plates away in the dishwasher and he's kind of like still hanging out. And you're like, hey, you know what? Maybe it's time for you to go. And that's kind of how I felt. I'm like, you know what? It's time for me. I've done it enough. I've built up my company. I was starting to get maybe a little complacent and feeling like, is my heart still in this? And it was time for me to explore some other projects in my life. And so I, on the air yesterday, and announced my retirement, and 40 years old, and it's just crazy, to think that all the sneaking downstairs watching Letterman and Carson wanting to work in TV all kind of came to an end yesterday, and I was tearful, and I couldn't believe it as I left my office for the last time. And I don't anticipate myself ever going back to broadcast television because I focus on, real estate and passive income. And it's kind of funny to think that because of what I've done with real estate and passive income that I'm able to do that. So that's That's why I'm here, my friend.
Well, the cool thing is, going back 18 years ago, I mean, you were paying your dues. I mean, just kind of share with us a little bit about what did your income look like? Because everybody thinks that if you're on television, you must make a tremendous amount of money. Life must be easy. For those of you listening, my wife's also on television. So a lot of people just assume that like Chris and Andrea are rich because she's on TV.
Right.
And that is not very accurate. It is if you're like in a movie, right? But if you're doing the news, it's a little bit different. So kind of give us an idea of what was life like starting off 18 years ago?
Yeah, you're right. And even like Ron Burgundy, an Anchorman, is not rich. He's in San Diego market, which is a really expensive place to live. And if you're working in TV at the local level, especially where I was in Montana, you're not making a ton of money. When you get up into the markets like San Diego, certainly, and Phoenix and Philadelphia, you start to make better money. But when you're in those like markets, what they call them like 122 or 150th market based on the demographics and population size, I mean, there's like, you're making peanuts. My first job in Montana, I think I was making like $23,000 a year. And this house that I was renting at the time, I was renting it from a couple. I lived in Helena, Montana, so I covered the governor's office there at the Capitol. And the couple that I was renting this house from lived in Missoula, so they lived about 3 hours away. And I never saw them, and I just would send a check every month. And every month I was going further and further into debt because I think my rent was like $500 a month. And I was making like $475 a month or so. It was like something where every month, every time I was ordering Chinese food, I was going further and further into debt. So yeah, it's not glamorous. And it's very difficult, to try to make ends meet in those small markets as you move around the country.
But for you to get to where you are today, you had to pay those dues, not just in broadcasting, but as we're going to kind of unfold your story here, you had to live those experiences to build your business that you are going into full time now. So kind of give us an example of, what was your early moments of looking into the real estate world?
I grew up with a lot of, I think real negative associations with money. Money doesn't grow on trees. We're not the Rockefellers. And so I really grew up with, if your audience has ever read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you understand the difference, the dichotomy between a rich dad, a poor dad, the philosophy. And I had an anchor yesterday as I was saying goodbye came up to me. An anchor in New York City came up to me and said, I just started reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and then I saw your tweet that you were leaving, and then I started learning about your website and started seeing what you do, and I couldn't believe it. And I said to myself, so it actually can happen. It actually can happen. And I said, yes, it can. And he said, I want to do this in a few years. I want to be right here in this exact moment where I can say goodbye to television and walk away. And I said, hey, doesn't take very long. Just get some focus and do it. For me, though, my dad grew up with that poor dad philosophy. He believed that the way to build wealth was, and to no fault of his own, that's how we're all sort of taught. But his thought on how to build wealth was you get a job, you work hard, and your wealth is built every time you ask for a raise. That the raise is how you build wealth, and that you put a little bit of money away in retirement, some sort of a savings account. And that's not how you build wealth. That's truly not how you build wealth in this country. Frankly, we've been lied to. Sign up, get a job, sign up for their 401k plan. All these people are making money off of your fees in your 401k plan. If you ever want to really get scared, open up your 401k plan and just look at how much you're spending on fees to have someone manage all of that for you. Really just infuriates me. People don't know about it. For me, it was a matter of having to shift that paradigm, to be honest with you, Chris. Like, it wasn't, because you can't ever truly build wealth and really have abundance in your life if you're still scared about money, if you still have a fear of money, if you still think that it's something that you need to hold on to. And for me, I knew as I made that shift, as I started to see that money is not something you can hold on to, that it flows through you like a river, and that it should be something you give away. And once I started to do that, once I started to give it away, is when I started to have abundance in my life. It's kind of an amazing, it really is one of those amazing laws of the universe that sounds a little hokey, but just start trying it. Try it for 2 weeks. Do like a 2-week experiment on just giving money away and watch what happens to you. Giving it away into the right places. Like Edwene Gaines, she writes in her book, The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity, one of the great books. The book changed my life, by the way. Her first spiritual laws are on tithing. She talks about even the people that have $1, that's all they've got. When they start giving 10 cents away to someone that feeds them spiritually, their life starts to change in dramatic ways. And I'm not talking about just blindly donating money to a church or something like that. That's fine if that gives you spiritual sustenance, great. I'm talking about, it could be the waitress, right? You're having a terrible day and you're at a diner and you're sitting at the bar at the diner having a cup of coffee and some eggs, and you're just down in the dumps, and that waitress spends an additional 5 minutes just hanging out with you, trying to brighten your day and talking with you and trying to cheer you up. That's the person you leave the big tip, right? That's the person who, letting that money flow through your life to that person. And you'll just be shocked at how your life will change.
Clayton, I couldn't agree more. And I didn't know you were going to go there. And I'm so glad you did. A few times on the podcast, we've actually talked about this. And so I'm pretty open about it. Andrea and I, we started getting involved in tithing about 2 years ago. You think in your mindset, like, it's addition and subtraction. Money is, money comes in, money goes out. And it doesn't make sense to give and to feel like you have more, right? Because you're giving money away, whether you're tithing or whether you're giving it to a waitress, whoever. And this is so crazy you're even bringing this up, because yesterday we were sitting there and we were talking. Life for us has been going really well the last couple months in our business and our personal lives and our spiritual lives. We started looking back and she goes, you know what? Ever since we started giving up control of every dollar and kind of putting it in the hands of someone else, whether it is, whatever you want to view. For us, it's spiritual. We're saying, look, this is not really our money. God's letting us use this money. So we allow this money to go out in the form of tithing, in the form of charity, in the form of gifts, wherever we feel compelled to give. And now looking back over time, it's like, wow, we haven't had really any money problems at all since we made that decision. And there's been times where we were destined to face some kind of big problem. Like here in Arizona, it's 120 degrees in the summer, and you could bet this summer our air conditioning unit just went completely out. And it's expensive to get a new AC unit when the whole state wants AC units, right? Supply and demand. But it didn't even faze us. We didn't even have a hiccup in our lives. And we just look back going, wow, this whole addition and subtraction thing, it makes sense to a certain level until you start giving and you see it's a little bit different.
Right. It's when and she really lays this out in the book. And because she'll say, in fact, my friend who taught me about this book, he says, one of these 4 spiritual laws is going to really be uncomfortable for you. And be honest with yourself. But one of these 4 spiritual laws is really going to be difficult for you to handle. It's going to feel uncomfortable. And that's the one that you need to do the most. So for me, it was tithing. It was giving money away because I was such a hoarder with it. I thought, God, I'm never going to get this again. I better hold on to it.
Yeah, you can't give with a clenched fist. Remember that right. An analogy when I heard that. I was like, that is so true.
Right.
So you mentioned 2 books so far. You talked about Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He's here locally in Phoenix, so we're huge fans of him here. I'll put links to that show notes. And then what was the other book you just mentioned? We'll put links in the show notes for that.
Yeah, it's by Edwene Gaines. She's a snappy old lady, hilarious, and her book is called The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity.
Okay, very cool. Right when you started talking, I wish this is a podcast, not a video, but I had this huge smile because I was nodding going, absolutely, I cannot believe he's talking about this. So I want to start diving into the real estate world. So before we hit record on this, we were kind of going back and forth with some stories here. So talk to me about those first few properties that you were diving into. What specifically is, I remember you talked about the condo full of cigarette smoke.
Yeah, so because I had been renting my whole life, and then right before the 2007, 2008 crash, you could still get 100% financing on a property. You could get 110% because they would even roll the closing costs into it. So you could literally not have to come out of pocket at all in order to buy a property. So my television show that I was working on, called The Daily Buzz at the time, was a nationally syndicated morning show. We were located in Dayton, Ohio, broadcasting to 110 stations nationwide. And they were moving us. They promised us, finally, we're going to move to a new studio. And this time it was in Florida, Orlando. So they built a new studio down there, and we moved. And I said, okay, everyone's buying a house. I should too. So I bought a 1-bedroom condo kind of on a golf course, and it was like $74,000, something like that. It was like a 1970s looking inside. I needed all the sort of updates. So I lived there and I worked on this thing and I updated it. Well, and still this is pre-crash, so you could get financing even if you didn't have a job, like no income, no job, ninja loans as they were called, right? Which is in hindsight, unbelievable. Yeah. Right? Think about, what a disaster we were waiting on, right? When that was allowed to happen. Now you can't do that at all. So when people talk about like a housing bubble, I kind of laugh. I don't believe that that's the case at all, because none of the fundamentals are there that were there in 2007, 2008. It's incredibly difficult to get loans today. So, anyway, so long story short, the neighbor next to me had passed away. She had a 2-bedroom condo, and I was in the process of getting married at the time. And I thought, wow, this would be great. We could get this 2-bedroom condo next door. And the family didn't want to list it on the multiple listing service with a realtor necessarily because it needed a ton of work. So they wanted to sell it as is, and they just didn't want the headache. They inherited the property, and they came from out of state to deal with this. Well, she lived in this place for like 30 years and smoked. And so even the walls had nicotine dripping down the sides. I mean, it was that bad. The filter in the furnace room was just awful. The kitchen cabinets were covered with a layer of like nicotine. It was just horrid. I knew the family didn't want to have to deal with this, so I made an offer. I talked to the family and I said, look, here's what would you need to feel comfortable with this and walking away? And I said, great. I got a loan on it somehow with 110% financing, basically with the closing costs rolled in. And I bought this place from them. And I started immediately painting and ripping out carpeting and drywall fixing and putting new cabinets in to the best of my ability and putting in new appliances and trying to get that smoke smell out of there with the furnace, cleaning the furnace and all of that. And I sold it for a profit. I flipped it a few weeks later. I got very, very lucky, and I flipped it right before the market collapsed. It was amazing. I sold my 1-bedroom condo and that one, made a nice big profit. And then, of course, the real estate market just collapsed. So much so that the guy that purchased the property reached out to my realtor and said, I don't know if it was something like I lost my job or I think he lost his job, unfortunately. Can I sell the house back? And I was like, no way. I can't afford to want to buy the house back. No way. I'm sorry. I can't do that. But I ended up going through a foreclosure just a short time later anyway on a property that I then moved into. I overpaid. I got over leveraged, 110% financing on like a 3-bedroom place that I moved into down the street. New construction. I bought the best house on the block. Real estate values plummeted in my A-class neighborhood, and I couldn't afford it. I mean, it was a crazy time. And so you have to go through those times, though, to kind of come out and see, well, what changes? How do you make sure that you don't go through those types of those sorts of problems again? And I invested in some speculative land projects and all of those things. And now I don't do any of that. Now I focus on stable blue-collar homes in great, boring blue-collar job markets that consistently cash flow. And even during that recession, consistently would cash flow. And that's what I stick with today.
So I think you had to go through some of those experiences to learn, right? I mean, your first flipping house, went well for you, right? You bought under market value, you sold it a couple weeks later, put some sweat equity into it, and you happened to do it right before it crashed. I mean, your first impression is like,
right.
Wow, I just made my annual salary in Montana in a couple weeks. I mean, this is kind of interesting here. Did you get that feeling that, okay, you did it once, so now you had the secret formula figured out, and that from here on out, it was just you are going to win, win, win? Do you think maybe that was your downfall? I'm trying to just kind of figure out what happened.
Yeah, it really was. It was, I had a friend of mine who had done real estate in the past. He lived in Seattle, and he was one of the co-anchors on the show that I worked on. He had experience in real estate. And so when we had this little extra cash, he had a friend who had come to him with some speculative land project in North Carolina where you would invest in a construction project on this golf course community that they were building. And Phil Mickelson's name was tied to it. They were building a big main lodge. They were going to be these golf course houses, log cabin style. They were going to look great. And you were basically front-loading and funding this build. Well, the builder backed out. The whole thing collapsed. Phil Mickelson backed out of it. And here I was left holding like a construction loan on a property for like $130,000. I had put down like $30,000 or whatever it was, and lost it all. I lost that. And I did 2 of them. It wasn't just enough for me to just do one. I put all of my profits from the flips of those properties in Florida into this, into this project. And it was a disaster. All these people lost their shirts. The builders lost money, and still today, I believe even like half the project it's still sitting there half built, like they cleared land, they cleared trees, and all I had to show for it was a vacant piece of land, basically. And I learned a lot in that, to your point, which is number one, don't invest in speculative stuff that doesn't exist. I don't do that anymore. Now, when I buy a house, it's a 3-bedroom, 1-bath or 2-bedroom, 1-bath house that exists. It's already built, or I'm building it. We'll place a great tenant in the property, and it exists. It's real. It's tangible. You can touch it. Back then, it was air, basically.
Gotcha. So, and another thing that's impressive here is listening to the story. At the time, so you're in Orlando. Your income's gone up since then. Now you're on a syndicated show, correct?
Right. So then I was on. This was beyond Montana. But not by a lot. Again, like you think, TV, you're glamorous. No, I think I was making maybe maybe I was bringing in about 70,000 roughly, or 65,000 when I worked for this nationally syndicated morning show.
Okay, so that makes sense. 'Cause I want the listeners to understand you're on a syndicated show. You're not making $700,000 a year.
No.
And saying, oh man, I just lost $30,000 in a property. You're making, $70,000 a year and you lost $60,000 in a property. So, that feeling of how did you go back to real estate after having that kind of kick in the pants?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time, because now here I was, had no money, was in a foreclosure. Now with a foreclosure on my record, my credit was destroyed. I couldn't get loans on anything. And fortunately, now I had moved up the ranks and was, had eventually moved to New York and was making good money at the network. But even still, I couldn't get a loan, because of the foreclosure on my record. I couldn't get any kind of a loan to buy anything. But it was good. It taught me that I needed to be creative. So I started just saving money and putting money away. And it wasn't until, I don't know if I've told this story or not, but I was on a flight to New Zealand a number of years ago, and maybe 10 years ago now, or 8 years ago. And when I was on this flight, I was sitting next to a couple, and I was going there to shoot photos at my friend's house. He's a big photographer in New Zealand, and he invited me to come for a few days. So I was going for about 5 days, and I was sitting next to this older couple. I mean, they were in their 50s on the flight. And I got to talking after the 16-hour flight. We were kind of getting ready to land, and we were all waking up half groggy. And I said, oh, how long are you going to New Zealand? I said, I'll be there for 5 days, And I said, what about you guys? How long are you going to be there? And said, we're going to be there for 2 months. I said, 2 months? What do you guys do? They weren't retired. But I said, what do you guys do that you can just go to New Zealand for 2 months? And he just looks at me. He says, oh, well, I'm a real estate investor. I said, oh, okay. And he said, so yeah, I'll have, passive income coming in while the whole time I'm there. I said, oh. Wait a second. Bells just went off in my head. Okay. And I just started picking the guy's brain about where he told me, where he invests. He invests in like really stable blue collar. He doesn't go after A-class neighborhoods where you have those expensive air conditioning units that you talked about, garage door openers. He goes after, meat and potatoes neighborhoods that even during recessions have consistent cash flow, because people need to live near the hospital. They need to live near the Amazon distribution center. They need to live near the post office where they work. And he said, there's, small single family homes. It's my bread and butter. And I said, bingo, I'm in. This makes sense to me. Okay. You're speaking my language. And so he told me he doesn't fall in love with real estate. He falls in love with ROI. Return on investment. He's, to him, there are 4 walls and a roof. He rehabs them, puts a great tenant in the property, and he cash flows. And he's like, so while I'm here in New Zealand, I'm making, $750 a month on this house that I paid for $50,000. And it's totally rehabbed, and I have a 5-year lease with this tenant. And he gave me examples, and I said, great. So as soon as I got back from New Zealand, I immediately figured out how I was going to buy 2 rental properties. And I bought 2, rehabbed them. I maybe overpaid a little bit. I over-upgraded. I put appliances in. I didn't even need to do that. Now all of my tenants provide their own appliances, so their own refrigerators, their own washer and dryer if they want them, their own window air conditioning unit if they want it. None of that goes into my properties because they don't expect it, and they don't want them. They want their own that they can maybe move in 3 years and take with them. So, I learned all of this from him, and that was really how everything turned around for me. That's where I really saw, and I talked about my failures. I talked about the collapse of this golf course community, and he said, "Oh, I would never invest in stuff like that." And I thought, wow, why didn't
5 years ago?
Exactly. Now you're showing me the light,
Okay, my wheels are going in my head now, and I'm asking you these questions not on interview aspect here on the podcast. I want to know for me personally now. So from here on out, this is going to be, we'll call this a Clayton coaching Chris one-on-one session, if you don't mind. So
yeah,
first question I have here is, first step, what did you do to generate that kind of savings? I mean, so you couldn't get a loan, you had a foreclosure, had some stuff going on. So you wanted to buy, you said 2 homes, right? 2 rental properties. Right. What did you do? How did you get them?
I think of cash any variety of ways. So when I say cash, I don't mean just a big bag of cash, and I don't mean cash that's in your savings account. I mean cash that could be in your 401k plan. I mean cash that you could have sitting in an IRA that you don't think about. I mean cash that you could be getting as private money from Uncle Johnny, who wants to make a decent return. That's still cash at the end of the day when you close on the property. So what I'm saying is you're not taking a mortgage out upfront to buy one of these properties. And furthermore, the property, for instance, that I bought in Michigan when I purchased my first 2 properties, I'll give you some numbers so your audience can wrap their heads around it. I'll just give you one example. So one property, I think I bought it for $26,000. It was a short sale. No bank is going to lend on that, right? Because you're going to put 30% down And I mean, this was then, right? You put 30% down, they're going to carry a note for $17,000. They just won't make any money off of it. And it's too risky for them as well. So banks just didn't like to loan on those types of things. So you needed to kind of bring cash in some capacity. I bought it, I think, for $26,000. I started building my team, like the guy on the New Zealand flight. So I started building my team of contractors. I started building my team of property management companies. I started doing all of that to put in place just for myself. And I over-upgraded. I think I spent, so let me get my calculator out here so I can give you some hard and fast numbers. So I think it was like $26,000 is what I closed on the property. I think I put in roughly put in about $17,000. So I did spend more than I needed to on this rehab because I did some extra things. Like I said, I put in hardwood floors, which I wouldn't do these days. I did some extra bells and whistles. I did some extra appliances, which I wouldn't do these days. So I should have probably spent $3,000 less, or maybe $4,000 or $5,000 less than what I did. So now that's my total cost, right? I'm into this house for like $43,000, and then it rents for $800 a month or $750 a month, whatever it is. So let me just run the math on that for you. So like $750 a month times 12 times 0.6, because I want to take out 40% for vacancy and repairs. That gives me $5,400 a year in cash flow after you account for vacancy and repairs and expenses. Okay. And then you divide that by the all-in cost of the house, $43,000. That's a 12% net ROI, 12% return.
Annually or monthly?
Annually. Well, monthly. It's a monthly because that's what I'm making per month. But it's an annualized, because it's times 12. So you could do it by, be the same thing every.
So you're making 12% on the rent every month.
Exactly, 12% net. Now, if I didn't put in the repairs and expenses and vacancy, it'd be well over 20%, which is more accurate at the end of the year on my spreadsheet anyway, because let's be honest, I just rehabbed the house. So what repairs am I going to have? And I've already placed a tenant in the house, so what vacancy am I dealing with? So all of that 40%, to be super conservative, it's just kind of like a real nice pillow to kind of like put there, underneath your head to feel better. But honestly, at the end of the year, it's a much higher ROI. Sorry to answer your question. I'll kind of come back to the circle around a bit on it because it was a little complicated. But how I bought that house, I took money out of my 401k. I borrowed from my 401k as a loan to myself.
So you didn't take the penalty on early withdrawal. You took a loan against it.
Exactly. And so now this came to me from a news anchor that I met who said that he does this once a year and buys a rental property from his 401k. And I said, what? So all of these things we don't learn in school, right? So here I was at the network. I was already starting to buy some rental properties, but I didn't even know this strategy. You're able to borrow up to a certain amount from your 401k. It's your money. So think of it as the bank of yourself, right? So I'm borrowing from the Bank of Clayton. I borrowed $50,000 out of my 401k.
Which I believe is the max.
It was the maximum. And then, and the beauty is you only get to put in whatever it's 16,500 or 17,500, 17,500 in your 401k every year.
This year it's 18,000, but yeah, it goes up with inflation.
So the beauty of this strategy is it's twofold. Number one, you're borrowing from yourself. This is your money. You don't have to get a bank loan. And it takes like one click on the website. You go to Fidelity or Wells Fargo. You borrow from it, transfers the money like in a day. And then you just pay it back out of your payroll. Then you're able to actually exceed the $18,000 a year because now you're paying it back to yourself with interest. So that's how you can actually eclipse the $18,000 threshold under the federal law because you're paying back your loan to yourself. So it's an additional interest that goes back, which you're paying yourself back. So it's a twofold whammy of goodness, of financial goodness for you. So I did that, and then I was able to buy this property and was able to fund the repairs out of that 401k. And, every year I'd rinse and repeat and use that same 401k to buy an additional property for us. And then I had some other additional cash saved up because I didn't have any credit. I couldn't do anything else, so I just socked some money away, and I bought the other house, which was also like 22 or 25,000, and I put 15 or 20,000 into it as well. And those were my first two.
What would life feel like if you no longer had to worry about money? What would life look like with $10,000 in the bank and zero debt? Do you realize you're really only a few decisions away from living life on your terms and not the bank's? How do I know this? Well, because we were once living paycheck to paycheck, completely broke and facing a mountain of debt. However, fast forward to today, we're debt-free, we're building wealth, and we live life on our terms, not the bank's. So now it's your turn. I would love for you to join me on my free workshop where I share the same step-by-step system we use to take back our life and our money once and for all.
So head on over to moneypeach.com/workshop and grab your free spot in this online training that you're going to absolutely love. Once again, that's moneypeach.com/workshop.
So a couple questions I have on the 401k loan. From what I understand, they usually put you on a 5-year payoff. So I always look at the risk, right? To generate income, there has to be some kind of risk, especially in passive income. If you're going to invest in the stock market, there's still a risk involved. If you're going to invest in real estate, there's still a risk involved. So some of the things just for listeners to keep aware of here is Clayton is borrowing from his 401k. But he's not borrowing from his 401k to buy a boat. He's not borrowing from his 401k to buy a car, something that's going down in value. He's borrowing on his 401k to plug into an asset that's going to generate him income or generate him monthly revenue, however you want to look at it. So in this situation, let's say he did 12%. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, 12% net per year is what I was making 12%. On this.
So for him to break even there, he'd have to be making 12% in his 401k every single month, which is very, very hard to do. As of this recording today, the markets are doing really, really well, but it's very cyclical. It goes up and down. And so he is getting 12% return on the rent from what he put into it. So this is a little bit more steady. So as you're talking, I'm kind of going through my mind because, I'm always telling people to push pause on taking a 401k loan on stuff like, oh, I need a boat, or, oh, I need a new car, or whatever it might be. I want to put a pool in my backyard. But I like the idea. There's risk, and I understand the risk, but I also like the reward aspect on pulling money out of the 401k. What happens there now is we don't have as high of a balance in our 401k. So if we have a 10% return and we have $100,000 in there, then every single year, that's $10,000 a year in return. If we have $50,000 in there, now it's only $5,000 because 10%. But we're taking that money and we're putting it into something that is going to give us passive income, which is just like in your 401k, but at a 12% return, or even better if you get a little bit better at buying and return on investment and putting the right repairs into it. Am I saying this right? Because this is what I'm thinking in my head to justify this. Is that right, Clayton?
Right. So you're saying to yourself, okay, how do I figure out that I'm going to be able to pay this loan back and all of that? And some questions about, obviously, if you're about to leave your job, like next week, now is not the best time to take out a 401k loan, right? Because then you'll have to pay that back. You'll have to get on a payment plan or whatever. You're going to have to pay it back with Fidelity or Wells Fargo or whatever you're going to do. But if you plan on being in your job for a while, you can structure it however you want. So I did a 12-month payback. You can do, I think, 12, 16, 24. You can structure it however you want. Again, I kind of come back to this is your money that's otherwise sitting there, maybe earning you a 3% return, maybe a 4% return, maybe a 5% return. Well, what if you could double that at 12%? And it's your money that you can use to buy rental real estate. To your point, you're building an asset class. Your net worth is now increasing. And the wealthy people know that the true way to build wealth is to increase your net worth. So increasing your overall net worth, now your net worth goes up by $50,000 because you just bought off market or in a discounted property. You're able to add value to it, and it's worth, maybe it appraises for 50 or 45. Well, you just now added $45,000 to your net worth column, and you keep rinsing and repeating, and you just keep growing it like that.
Clayton, now are you mostly focused on buying and holding a property and renting it out, or on the rehabbing a property and selling it for a profit?
No, I'm not really. So I stopped the flipping game. And I've thought about it again and maybe doing some of that in New Jersey again. But, the markets where you want to do that are the markets where you're going to see the bigger returns. And so where I now buy and hold, the flip margins are small. I would rather do that in New Jersey where I could make $200,000 on a flip. And, you're holding it for a year or 9 months as you do this big renovation on the property. There's a lot of moving parts, though. And that stuff is the stuff that scares me, though, because the properties that I do now, for Morris Invest, my company, I have them in our portfolio. I buy them and I renovate them. And if I didn't sell them to one of our investors, I would just keep them in my portfolio because they'd be cash flowing at a great ROI. But I don't want to hold on to a $300,000 flip in the hopes that I could sell it for $500 after I've put $100 into it. But what happens if the market goes down a little bit and there's not a buyer for that property that I now have been working on for 8 months in New Jersey? Because then you're working for a paycheck. So flipping is working for a paycheck. And if you think about it, that's really what it is, because you need then another property to get that next paycheck. You got to find that next deal and spend 8 months rehabbing that and then get another paycheck from the sale of it. and then roll that into your next one. So it's very, very difficult. Flipping is not a game that I'm terribly interested in anymore.
When you buy your properties for these rentals, are you trying to accelerate the payoff on that? Are you putting these on 30-year mortgages, 20, 15, 10? What kind of mortgage are you putting them on? And then are you accelerating that mortgage down, or are you just staying pace with the rent?
To be honest with you, all the properties that I do, I try to buy with cash.
Oh, okay.
Now, I know, you might say to yourself, oh, that's going to, alienates a lot of our listeners because you'd be surprised at how many people, again, have that Roth or that 401k or that IRA. And again, cash comes in different forms, right? Cash is the 401k. Cash is cash on hand. Cash is, so I use the cash for my rentals now. Adding up all the rental income that we get every month, every few months, I'm able to pull some of that cash from all of our rentals and buy another property. And it just keeps snowballing from there. A buddy of mine started with nothing, okay? He got a property, I think he bought it for, it's like 60,000, I think. Rehabbed it, placed tenants in it, and, it had a nice little appraised value of like 80 or something when he was done. He was able to pull 75%, 80% of the equity out of that, and he refinanced it, pulled the cash back out, and he bought his second one. And then he bought his third, and he just rinsed and repeated over and over and over again. Now he owns 2,000 properties. And he started just like I did with nothing.
Wow.
So it can happen very quickly if you just have the stomach for it. And it doesn't have to be that nauseating or overwhelming. We have a lot of like our clients that we do houses for started with one property and now they've got 10 or 15. And I get emails all the time. Like I just got one this morning from a lady, and I won't read her name, but because of everything I went through in my life yesterday leaving television, she sent me a note saying she's now been able to leave her job as of August 4th. And she just wanted to let me know how she was able to take action and find financial freedom. She worked there for 10 years. Her first rental property she bought, when did she buy it? She bought it 2 years ago, and now she's got like 6 properties. She's not fully at financial freedom yet, but she was able to quit that second job that she had and focus on the one job that she has, and she's well on her way. So it doesn't have to take 20 years to do this. If you follow this sort of strategy of pulling money back out of your properties, refinancing them, and then buying additional properties and adding that to your portfolio.
Wow. Okay, impressive. Your buddy that goes from, his first property to 2,000 properties. And I kind of look at it as like a wildfire, right? It starts with one spark. And once that spark gets going, that's your first house, right? It was tough. You had to dig deep, sacrifice, get that first house. And now you're rinse and repeating. You have 3 houses, and the rent from 3 houses adds up quicker to buy that 4th one. And then you get down to 10 houses, and the rent from the 10 houses goes even much quicker to get that 11th one, and so on. Is that kind of what you're saying with this rinse and repeat?
Exactly. And you can, there's 3 stages of real estate investing. And this is something I talk about all the time, but the 3 stages are buy, own, and cash flow. So the first one, buy, you're buying rental properties in your first stage. When you're in your 30s and 40s and even 50s, like you're buying them because you're just worrying about increasing your net worth, okay, at this point. You're not really worried about the cash flow, although the cash flow is there. So even if you have to borrow money from Uncle Johnny and it's renting for $700 a month and you've got to pay him $400 a month and you're cash flowing $300, great. Put that in a bank account and ignore it. Now you've added a property to your portfolio, and then rinse and repeat. Grab another one, grab a third one, grab a fourth one. So you're buying in order to get to $1 million in real estate in net assets.
Gotcha.
It's much faster than you actually think. Then you own it. Once now those are paid off, maybe it's 5 years. Maybe it takes you 5 years to pay Uncle Johnny back. Using the cash flow from the tenant. Great. Well, it took you 5 years to build up $1 million worth of real estate. And now your net worth is worth $1 million. Great. Now after 5 years, now the cash flow, right? Now it's fully paid off, and now you can reap the rewards of all of that cash flow. But here's the rub, is that in real estate investing, the old rule is if you're a real estate investor and you're paying taxes, you're doing it wrong. So you should. That's the benefit of being a real estate investor, is that you basically don't pay anything in taxes. And so if you do it right, you want to keep acquiring real estate until you die. Buy until you die, as you probably heard. And that means that every time I buy an additional asset, I'm trying to offset the income now that I'm now getting from all of my tenants' rental income. So I buy another asset for my LLC that owns the property that offsets the cash flow from those tenants. And you just keep doing that until you die, and you hand all that down to your family. That's how you build legacy wealth.
Wow. So how are you bypassing taxes then, for those of us wondering?
Well, it's not even bypassing taxes so much as, our tax advisor, Tom Wheelwright's the smartest tax accountant in the country. He's been on my podcast a number of times. He is right there in the Arizona area as well. So all smart people down there in Arizona. He is probably the most brilliant real estate tax accountant in the country. And what he'll say is, again, if you're buying real estate and you do it right, you shouldn't be paying taxes, because if you're buying it as a business, all of our properties we own, we buy in LLCs. It costs like $100 to set up. Now you're incorporated as a business, and now I'm being taxed as a business, not an individual, meaning the income that I receive from these tenants is being taxed at a business level, not as an individual. And then when I buy an additional rental property and I do repairs and I add that to my portfolio, guess what? That tenant income is now offset by the purchase of that new property, of the tax depreciation that I'm able to claim now on this property, of the repairs that I just did on this new property. And I keep doing that over and over and over again. So the real problem is when you stop buying properties, now you're suddenly making all of this income from all these tenants. Guess what? That's income, right? It's income tax. And you better have something to offset it, or you're going to pay you're going to be paying higher in taxes. So many great ways to mitigate your taxes using real estate. I mean, the tax laws in this country were written for entrepreneurship, and they were written for real estate investors. And most members of Congress own real estate. So they know something, right? And
Yeah.
so you should too,
Wow. Okay. So you got my wheels going in my head now. So one of the things I hear from so many people is, I don't want to get involved in real estate investing because, and then there's, 20, 30 different reasons that you'll hear over the course of, I'm sure you hear them too. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you hear that you could debunk? Because I think this is such a great opportunity that people are afraid to get into because they don't know enough. But I think once you know enough, there's just a huge opportunity out there for people to create passive income, build wealth, increase their net worth, leave something to their children's children. But before they jump in, there's something that's causing them not to want to join. And so what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've heard?
Okay, let's go through a couple of these myths. These are fun because sometimes I'll talk to a husband and wife on the phone. They're, thinking about investing with us and buying a property through my company. And they'll say, you need to convince my wife because she's just not. And I say, first of all, no, I don't. That's your job. No, there's no convincing because, maybe the husband will say, well, my wife's she's not into risk and she doesn't like doing risky things. I said, well, to me, here's the myth. Real estate is super risky. It's actually not. Now, I know I scared a lot of people at the beginning telling you my story, but that's not what I do today. I mean, the type of real estate investing I do is, to me, in my mind, far less risky than the stock market. If I buy a rental property for $40,000, like a small 3-bedroom, 1-bath little brick house with a yard and a driveway in a great little town where you drive down the streets and everyone's at work during the day and they come home, the postal employee, we just rented to a postal employee, 17 years with the U.S. Postal Service, right? Single mom, wanted to be in the good school district, signed a 2-year lease with us in this house. That's the typical tenant in one of my properties. So that to me is way less risky than the stock market because that house can never go down to $0 in value. Unlike the stock market where I could be investing in some company and suddenly my stock's worth zero, which has happened. And I have no control over that. Coca-Cola can decide to hire Britney Spears as their spokesperson and their stock plummets, and I can't knock on their door, unless I own billions of dollars in shares and I'm like a big board member or something. I can't control that. So with real estate investing, the fundamentals are such that if you're buying in certain blue-collar neighborhoods like I do, the beauty of it is that people need to consistently rent, right? People need to rent. And in a down economy, people need to rent and live. Where are they going to live? They need shelter. They need food. And if they can't buy the house because a bank won't give them a loan, then they're going to have to rent. Why shouldn't they rent from you? That's the way I look at it. So I think the myth that it's really risky is something that I kind of battle against and help educate people on, that it's one of the least risky investments you can make if you buy right. Now, if you're not smart and you buy $1 million single family house in San Francisco Bay, yeah, that's not a smart investment, right?
Sure.
What can happen? You're sitting on a bubble of this tech boom right now. And do you think that house is going to stay worth $1 million and you're going to get $5,000 a month in rent in an A-class neighborhood? No. That's why I rent in C-class neighborhoods where there's not much fluctuation and it's actually really boring. So what happens in that San Francisco house when the value plummets to $600,000 and the same tenant that used to be able to afford spending $5,000 a month in rent now the going rate is $2,500. That's what we see in big Manhattan skyscraper apartments, It's what we see in Los Angeles and those other places. And suddenly now you as the landlord, maybe you've got a $4,000 mortgage on this $1 million property, and you're bringing only in $2,500 a month from the tenant. That's a problem. That's risky. That's not what I do. I would never buy a house like that. So the risk thing to me is one huge myth. Another myth is that you need to do it all yourself. People are like, oh, I don't have the time for this. I'm a doctor. I can't do this. Well, like my company, I work with doctors all day long. Like they're in brain surgery. The last thing they want to do is deal with tenants and getting a property rented and rehabbed. You can find great partners out there that will actually do all of that for you and take care of it all, turnkey, so that you just collect rent checks every month. So there is a team that goes out and renovates the house and places a great tenant in the property and all of that. There's this myth, here's another myth, that the best properties are in your own backyard. That, Chris, you probably think, oh, I'm going to get involved in real estate investing. This weekend, I'm going to drive around Phoenix and maybe call up a realtor. I'm going to try to find a rental property.
Well, that was actually the question I was going to ask. Is it local only, or where are you looking? So I'm glad you're bringing this up.
Yeah, so the best properties are not in your backyard unless you happen to live in, one of these strong blue-collar Midwest markets where the taxes are $100 a year, $200 a year, and you're near a FedEx distribution hub and a hospital and these solid blue-collar jobs that aren't going to China and, these types of places. So no, the best properties are not in your own backyard, and you need to kind of give up on that. Like I'm in New Jersey. I would never invest in New Jersey. I wouldn't say never, but the chances of me wanting to plunk down $18,000 a year in property taxes and invest in a property in New Jersey where it takes 8 months to get a tenant evicted. No, I'd rather go to landlord-friendly states where an eviction can happen very, very quickly if you get a bad tenant, and where the taxes are very low and the property values are much lower and cheaper to get into and the ROI is higher. So there are a lot of myths that we really work at my company to help overcome and help people understand that you can get involved in real estate investing even if you live in China. You can invest in the United States. It's not that hard at all.
Clayton, I want you to kind of give us an example of what you do. Like, what does Morris Invest do? Because you're telling me Midwest, blue collar, look for low property taxes. And it seems like there's a lot of research to do out there. And so my question is there a shortcut that you've maybe created or a cheat sheet or something that we can learn from you? Because you're right. I mean, everything's, you can make a small mistake, which can cost you big time in the long run. So how are you helping people?
Yeah, I mean, well, my company is simple. It's not a fit for everyone. Like if you're a hands-on kind of person and you want to hang drywall and you want to be actively involved in a rehab of a property, like what my company does is not for you. But if you're the type of person that wants to get a property in the $40,000, $50,000 range, have it produce between a 10 and 12% net ROI for you, and you want somebody else to do it all for you, meaning we rehab the house, we get it rent ready, place a tenant in the property with our property management teams that we work with, and you just collect rent checks every month. The only thing you need to do is set up insurance. You own the property free and clear, like it's in your name on title, on the deed, and you get all the tax benefits and everything of owning rental properties. And I don't want to work with people just for one property. I want to help people, and it's the mantra in our office. Like it's a team meeting this morning. I said, remember why we do what we do is to help people achieve financial freedom. So the first question we want to ask on the phone is, what does your freedom number look like? What is your monthly expenses? What are your monthly expenses? And what if we could then have 7, 10 rental properties that are bringing in $700 a month? Would that cause you to achieve financial freedom? Like if all of your monthly expenses were covered, what would that look like for you? I mean, that's my goal. So I want people, I get super excited about helping people, and I want them to hit, that if it only takes you 8 properties because you live in an area of the country maybe is not super expensive and you don't have a lot of expenses, and it may only take 8 properties for you to achieve financial freedom. Good. I want to help you get there in 2 years, So that's what we do. I mean, like I said, we built the company for ourselves, like my wife and I, and then it just kind of grew organically. Like I said, my mom was my first client who came to me and said, I've got $40,000 in my 401k to invest. Can you help me get a property? And we did everything for her. And then it was a friend, then it was my sister, then it was my brother-in-law. And then before I knew it, like we had a company and we were growing and we were helping people build passive income. And it's been a great gift in my life, to be honest with you.
No, I love hearing that because it's you were never chasing the money. It was, you created something for you and your wife and then your mom and your friends and so on. And I can completely relate to that. And now, you have this company and you're providing a ton of value to people. So I'm going to actually steal a little bit of your time on something that I have that I'm working on, because I was reading on your blog recently. You put out there, here's a trick or a tip to pay off your house in 3 to 5 years. And my light bulb went off in my head and I said, okay, wait a second. Clicked on, I was reading it. Maybe in the next 3 minutes, could you kind of just give me the overview if I was willing to give you some numbers of where Andrea and I are at?
Yeah, absolutely.
And okay, so we have a house. Our mortgage, we just went under $100,000. So I think we're like right at $98,000 we owe on our house. And a similar house in the neighborhood, let's say, sold for about $370,000. So, what would your advice be to me? Say that we're not on this podcast. You and I are sitting down for a beer talking about, I'm picking your brain. Clayton,
right.
What should I do here? I would love to know, and I'm sure our listeners probably would love to know too, but for selfish reason, I want to know.
Okay, so let me do some numbers here. I got my little trusty Staples calculator. My little girl came in the other day and grabbed my calculator. She's like, I'm going to go play with this. I said, no, you're not. Do you realize Daddy runs his entire business off this ugly, big, honking calculator?
Big buttons.
So back in the book, quick analyzation of properties nonstop as our deals are coming into our office. Okay, $370,000 minus $98,000 is what you said the house is owed,
yes.
Right? So you're looking at about $272,000 in equity right now.
Yes.
Okay. Let's multiply that times 0.8. Because that is going to give us about what you would be able to get with a home equity line of credit for, basically 80% loan to value. Just means 80% of the value of your home. So that's about $217,000 that you would have in equity with a home equity line of credit that you could then use for whatever you want. Now, the huge mistake is using that home equity line of credit to buy a boat, right?
Yeah.
Or I would say doing repairs is I'm not a huge fan of that either. But if you need to put on a new roof, okay, I understand you can do that. And it's because you're still adding value to your property. But I can tell you what I would do.
Okay.
If I had $217,000 in value in my home, I would do two things. Number one, I would buy rental properties with half of it or a quarter of it or 3/4 of it. I'd figure out how to break it up. And the other half I would use to pay down the rest of my primary mortgage quickly so that it's almost paid off in like a year or 3 to 5 years, however you want to structure it. And, as you mentioned, my wife and I wrote a short book. It's like you could read it in an afternoon called How to Pay Off Your Mortgage in 5 Years using this strategy. So you would basically set up a home equity line of credit that you would then take large chunks of change. So you could take like $10,000 from your HELOC, your home equity line of credit, and just write a check right to your principal $98,000 balance. Now, guess what? That's dropped down to $88,000 in how much you owe. But it's not just about the money, because now you've literally shaved years off of your amortization schedule for your mortgage. You may have gone from still owing 15 years on this mortgage down to 13 or down to 13 and a half. We have an amortization calculator and we have the whole thing inside the book. It's all free. You can download it. But then it shows you, once you start playing around with these numbers, like how you can quickly pay off your primary mortgage using your home equity line of credit, because it's two different kinds of interest. You're trading simple interest, which is your HELOC, like a credit card, versus amortized interest, which is time. So you're trading time for interest. And, time is the great enemy. And your mortgage, your primary mortgage, uses time to bite into your body, to bite into your family's finances. That same home that you bought for let's just say you bought it for $300, ultimately you're paying like $650 for that house, $650,000 for that house, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can shave off the time it takes for you to pay it back, you're saving yourself not only money, but you're saving your years of payments. And we go into way more detail in the book on how to structure this with your bank account and all of that. But the bottom line is I would use a portion of that right away to start making these nice big payments in big chunks to your primary mortgage. And you go from 98 to 88 to 78 in a short amount of time. And then you funnel your income from your job right into the HELOC and paying that back very quickly. It's kind of amazing when you look at they're just basically different financial tools. That's all they are. They're different financial tools. One is simple interest like a credit card, and one is amortized interest. And you're basically using one to crush the other one. And I've done this multiple times on multiple properties. I've heard from so many readers who've done it, and it's just an absolute game changer. And banks really don't want you to know about it.
Okay, so now I have to go get this book. So, okay, I need to find out, where can not just myself, but where can our audience find this book? Where can we find out? I know you have a podcast. You've sparked, I guarantee you there's plenty of people listening right now going, okay, I need to find out what he's talking about in detail. Where can we find more of Clayton Morris?
Yeah, the podcast, if you're listening to this, chances are you love podcasts. So my podcast is called, it's a very generic name. You won't forget it. It's just called the Investing in Real Estate Podcast with Clayton Morris. And we publish 3 times a week. On Mondays, I do a bit of a monologue episode. So like this past Monday, I did an episode on the Houston flooding and how to understand the differences in insurance policies and what happened there versus like what could happen in Florida with insurance and rental properties and all of that. And then my wife and I do an episode on Wednesdays together where we talk about structuring your family finances, how to incorporate your business, how we manage all of our rental properties. So we talk about that sort of stuff. And then Friday, we always have an expert guest. So we just had Robert Kiyosaki on the show and, that kind of thing. So that publishes, the Investing in Real Estate podcast. We walk through all of these strategies on there and really try to help people who have no experience. Like you just go back to start at episode 1, and we try to treat it like an encyclopedia. So you can just walk through each episode and really, I think, get a whole education on rental real estate and buy and hold real estate. And the book just came out. It's a short read. It's called, How to Pay Off Your Mortgage in 5 Years. If you just go to Amazon and search that in Amazon, it'll pop right up. And it's a big yellow cover with a guy squeezing a house with his middle finger. So on the front page. And I think it'll help a lot of people. It's a great strategy to not just use to pay off your primary mortgage, but it's also a great strategy to use to buy rental real estate also.
Wow. So we're going to have links to the show notes for the podcast, the book, ClaytonMorris.com. Clayton, I always end this podcast. I ask 2 questions that I just love the answers to. So there are 2 questions that I came up with, and they're kind of fun. So the first one I want to ask you is, what are the 2 to 3 books that you recommend? Besides the book, we're going to have the show notes for your book. But if you're going to hand out a book or buy a book for somebody, which ones do you give out?
I love giving out. I've donated, there's 2 books actually. I would say The Alchemist is a wonderful book, and I've given that out to a lot of our investors because it shows you this journey, this sort of this sort of spiritual journey. I think that a lot of people go on and struggle with, and it's really a parable and tells the story of this boy's journey, and it's really powerful. So I would say that book, people should check that out. And again, that's a short read. You can even get it on Audible and listen to it, and you'll really enjoy it. But I have to say more powerful, maybe even than that, is The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity by Edwene Gaines. Like I said, one of the 4 spiritual laws will be uncomfortable for you. And whatever of those 4 spiritual laws is the most uncomfortable is the one that you need to focus on incorporating into your life. For me, it was tithing. And when I started to tithe, everything changed in my life. So I would recommend picking up those 2 books, and could change your life.
It's funny you mentioned The Alchemist. We've had a couple guests. The last one we had, I think 2 episodes ago, episode 61, we had Andy recommended that book as well. So it's very ironic that you just said The Alchemist. All right, last question I'm going to hit you with is, what is the picture on the home screen of your phone?
Oh, you're going to love this. This is very weird. So the picture on the home screen of my phone is a sigil of wealth. A sigil is a picture of the vibrational energy around certain things that exist in our universe. Love, wealth, other things. So they're able to study at the vibrational level how particles move when they're associated with wealth or with love. And they're able to actually get pictorial representations of these things. So I've got a framed picture of this sigil. It's like a black and white kind of image, and it looks like a little vibrational pattern of wealth and prosperity. And I have it on my phone as well. And every time I look at it, you're surrounded by it. No joke, when I put this framed photo in my office and started putting this on my phone, my company exploded. And I just was receiving so many amazing emails from people, and it was within the same week. And, I think you just open yourselves up. You're mentally opening yourself up to wealth building. You're opening yourself up when you start to surround yourself and see yourself as a source of abundance rather than living from a place of fear. So I like to see it every day when I click on my home screen of my phone. I see it there.
All right, so I'm going to have to get a picture of that from you so we can put that in the show notes because I'm trying to visualize it, but it'll help if we have that picture in the show notes.
Yeah, I will send you the link for it.
Perfect. Hey, Clayton, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is one of our longer episodes, and I told you in the very beginning, hey, sometimes we talk for 30 minutes and sometimes we go for an hour, and it just depends on, what we're talking about. I could not stop asking questions. So thank you for taking an hour of your day, man. This was excellent for me. I know this is excellent for our listeners, but you got a lot of value that you're providing out there, and I'm excited for people to get connected with you and do something in their lives that they're moving forward finally. They're not in a stalemate. They're not worried. They're removing the fear, and they're moving forward. And I think real estate investing is such a great way to do that. I've never met anybody who invested in real estate successfully that said, man, I wish I would have never have done that. It just didn't work out. Everybody says, just like the guy on the plane to New Zealand. I mean, it gives you time freedom. It builds a legacy for your family and your family's family. So thanks for just sharing your story and coming on the show.
Well, my pleasure. And the only regret real estate investors ever have, get 100 of them in a room and ask them, they will all say the same thing. Oh, I wish I wouldn't have sold that one house. I wish I would have held more of the houses instead of flipping these houses. That's the truth. So thank you so much for having me. It's been a real treat.
And just like that, we wrap up another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. All the show notes, links, anything that Clayton and I talked about can be found over at moneypeach.com/session63. That's moneypeach.com/session63. Special thanks to my producer, Steve Stewart, and my assistant, Kayla Sloan. Without them, this show would not be possible. Stay tuned next week where we jump into episode 64, and I'm bringing on an entrepreneur from San Francisco who is jumping into the fintech space, and he is going to take the mortgage industry and flip it on its head. We'll see you guys next week, same time, same place, with another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. Take care. Boom, 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 boom.